Greetings and welcome back to the Cinema Sanctum. You know, I was going to save this one for October 30th, but I couldn't help myself. So tonight I'm going to be talking about director Alex Proyas' 1994 action classic, The Crow.
People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right.
Based on James O'Barr's cult comic book series, The Crow tells the story of a musician named Eric Draven who was killed by a gang of thugs when he tries to rescue his fiancée on the night before they were meant to be wed. But for Draven, death isn't the end, and he returns on the one-year anniversary of his murder, ushered back to the land of the living by a mystical crow to exact revenge on those who wronged him. Distributed by Miramax and Dimension Films, this 1 hour, 42-minute R-rated action fantasy film stars Brandon Lee, Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott, David Patrick Kelly, and Rochelle Davis. Alright, so here's my spoiler-free review of The Crow. So if you've never seen The Crow and you would ask someone who's a fan, there's a good chance they use terms like perfect or best movie ever to describe the film. And then you check it out with all that build-up, all that hype, and there's a good chance you wouldn't get it. My goal with this review is to send you into your first screening of The Crow with realistic expectations. Suspending your disbelief is essential if you're hoping to enjoy The Crow. The themes of love, loss, and vengeance are grounded, but the environment, the characters, the mysticism, they're all entirely expressionistic. It's not meant to be taken literally, so don't. The setting is an infernal take on Detroit, a city lost to violence and corruption, run from the shadows by an eccentric underboss named Top Dollar, whose crime syndicate is responsible for the fires that consume the city every year on Devil's Night, also known as Mischief Night, also known as October 30th. But all that shit sounds a lot more complicated than it is, because the story is simple, and embracing that simplicity was a stroke of brilliance from the film's creators. It's like I mentioned in the synopsis, Draven is a musician who was killed along with his fiancée, but somehow he reanimates as some sort of revenant, spiritually bound to a mystical crow who helps him navigate a path to vengeance. Anything beyond that is just adding a bit of flavor. Eric Draven is of course played by Brandon Lee. It's a fascinating character, and the more I've watched it, the more interested I've become in how he arrived at some of the choices he made. Emotionally, Draven's all over the grid. He's fun, he's relatable, sometimes he's just straight up cool. And while Lee delivered a quality performance, there is an aspect of Draven I felt could have been just a bit more refined. But more on that later. Overall, I enjoyed Brandon Lee's work, and I don't know how anyone could have brought a more thoughtful approach towards playing Eric Draven. Next is Draven's nemesis, Top Dollar, played by Michael Wincott. I don't know what he was handed in the script, but what a surprisingly layered character. He's clearly an arch criminal, but it's the moments where he seems genuinely amused or bored by the chaotic rogues gallery that surrounds him where he really shines. It's easily my favorite performance in the film. Then there's Sergeant Albrecht, played by Ernie Hudson. Hudson brings a lot of charisma and a level of empathy to the role that makes you warm to him almost immediately. He's also the most aligned with the audience's point of view, given that he's in the dark on most of what's going on regarding the unexplainable resurrection of Eric Draven. And then finally there's Sarah, our young narrator, played by Rochelle Davis. Now Davis was only 12 years old at the time the movie was made, and if you watch my review on Tix, you know I don't pick on kids. I thought her performance was stoic, but I thought it worked fine given the latchkey nature of the character. The rest of the supporting cast, which includes David Patrick Kelly, Bai Ling, Angel David, Lawrence Mason, Michael Massey, Sophia Shinnis, Anna Thompson, Tony Todd, and John Polito, is excellent. They really bring a lot of menace, humor, and color to an otherwise washed-out world. The Crow also features a great soundtrack. You got The Cure, Nine Inch Nails, and Stone Temple Pilots, to name a few. The fact that I owned the cassette before I even saw the film should tell you all you need to know. Now, this next comment is bound to piss some people off, but I don't care. In my opinion, Alex McDowell's production design is the defining element that has caused this film to endure for 30 years and counting. It's such a unique atmosphere, ranging from industrial gothic to low-rank grunge, that doesn't hide the fact that it's a set or sometimes a miniature. Everything looks handcrafted because it was, and it's clear that a great deal of attention to detail went into the practical world building, something that hardly ever happens anymore in the era of big-budget bullshit, which makes no sense to me. Moving on to the cinematography, The Crow was shot by Oscar-nominated Dariusz Wolski, who was fresh off the music video scene, and that's very noticeable. But as a result, there's an experimental quality to the film, which I think is a combination of vignette storytelling and O'Barr's source material. There are a lot of shots that feel plucked directly from a music video, which at the time was stylistically fresh. Today, it's probably classified as nostalgic. Either way, it's striking and effective, and I wouldn't change a frame of it. So I can't truthfully speak to how accurate the film is to its comic book source because I've never read it. But I've never heard anyone bitching about it either, so I'm assuming it's pretty faithful. I'm sure a lot of this is due to how involved creator James O'Barr was when it came to the script, which was co-written by David S. Show and John Shirley. In an effort to prepare you, though, I gotta admit some of the dialogue borders on sappy, melodramatic, dare I say cheesy, but The Crow was meant to be a romanticized tale of vengeance, so whether that's gonna bother you or not is based solely on your personal preference. From a direction standpoint, I think Alex Proyas did a great job with The Crow. It's a fast-paced film, but there's still time taken to establish relationships and showcase the interesting scenery. One of the more unique choices Proyas made was to embrace the movie set look and fully block out certain scenes as if they were a play, which further complemented the film's already incredible visuals. Look, even if you're not into comic book adaptations, and I'm not, The Crow is well worth your time. It's truly a unique film that stylistically has been often copied but never matched. It's full of great performances, fun action sequences, some terrific music, and a production design that the Hollywood sphincter of generic modern comic book movies couldn't even dream of shitting out. I highly recommend checking out The Crow. Now, let's get physical. The Crow is available on 4K UHD and HDR from Paramount. The 4K is available in 3 different editions, a standard edition and 2 limited edition steelbook variants. You're currently looking at one of them. All versions boast a new 4K restoration of the film, as well as new and legacy special features. The new special features include Shadows in Pain Designing the Crow, which is a brand new 3-part documentary. Legacy special features include audio commentaries, a behind-the-scenes featurette, extended scenes, deleted footage, and more. It's a major release from Paramount, so most physical media retailers should at least be stocking the standard edition. Unfortunately, it does look like the steelbook variants are sold out, but you might be able to find one at Gideon's Pawn Shop. I heard they were having a fire sale. Now, I've owned The Crow on various formats, but for this review, I watched the 2011 Blu-ray from Lionsgate and this brand new 30th anniversary edition from Paramount. Here are my thoughts. When I initially got back into collecting physical media, one of the first things I asked myself was, where the fuck is The Crow? Fortunately, I didn't have to wait too long because here it is. And I'm pleased to say that Paramount has given us a damn fine release with this 30th anniversary edition. Truth be told, the bold visuals have always caught my eye, even the wonky 4.3 VHS I owned in the late 90s. It's got this high contrast, rain-soaked scenic that allows elements like fire or even Draven's stark white face to really pop. The 4K transfer showcases all of this beautifully without eliminating the source grain or losing the details in the shadows, which is not the case in the Lionsgate Blu-ray from 2011. Audio-wise, I'm pretty sure it's the same audio track from the 2011 Blu-ray on the 4K, so I don't have anything to report. As for the packaging, and it pains me to have to say this, but honestly, I wish the Steelbook used some configuration of the original artwork and left this fan art, desktop wallpaper shit for the standard. And even if I like the design, I'd immediately be turned off by the quotes. Like, we've seen the movie, we get it, we know all the lines, all that stuff, whatever. In my opinion, text on artwork like this is just tacky. Just use the artwork. I thought the inner case artwork was fine, it had no text on it, and the disc itself being plain didn't bother me. I mean, I guess I should at least be grateful they didn't write "Onions make you fart" big time on that. But hey, I'm sure there's a lot of people that like it. I'm just tired of these studios redoing the artwork, thinking it somehow makes the film feel fresh. It doesn't. It's unnecessary. Most fans just want the original artwork. That's what they want on the shelves. Give us what we want. Now, the special features are mostly legacy, but the one new addition I really appreciated was Shadows in Pain Designing the Crow with the 3-part feature. As I mentioned in my spoiler-free review, I've always felt the production design and art direction were a key factor in the Crow's decades-long appeal. This feature focuses on production designer Alex McDowell talking at length about the visuals, the why, and the how they were achieved. It's a fascinating watch that was both inspiring and frustrating, leaving me muttering the statement they just don't make them like they used to over and over and over again. Overall, even though I'm not a fan of the box art, this is an excellent release of The Crow, and it's one that I'm happy to have on the shelf. Again, this version seems to be sold out unless you're willing to overpay for it, but honestly, the standard 4K will give you the exact same viewing experience, which is all that should ever really matter. It's a must-own for fans of the film, and it's the best I've ever seen it look. I highly recommend picking it up. At this point, if you haven't seen The Crow and don't want it spoiled, it's best to stop watching until you do, because this next segment will be spoiler heavy, and I'd hate to ruin the film for you.
Gasoline I smell?
So I didn't get a chance to see The Crow in theaters because I was too young, but I remember helping my dad hand out candy on Halloween that year, and it felt like everyone was dressed as Eric Draven. Truth be told, I ended up seeing it about a year later on VHS at a sleepover, and it's been a staple in my collection ever since. I've spoken a lot about visuals in this episode because I'm not sure how to discuss The Crow without addressing the look and feel of the film. I mean, right off the bat, you're hit with the contrast-rich Detroit hellscape. I love this opening because everything is burning, but then for the rest of the film, we exist in like this purgatorial downpour, traveling through the smoldering ashes of this hopeless neo-Gothic metropolis. Now, I've known several people over the years, not film people, but dirty casuals who've chuckled at the sight of a miniature like they're gonna win a prize for calling it out. And what I want to say to them every time is, yeah, asshole, I know it's a fucking miniature. That's part of the charm. You know, I'm not sure why people get all hung up on them either. The film was made in the early 90s, but you know what? Even if they made it in 2004 or 2024, if the scenic was entirely CGI, it'd look like absolute flash-fried dog shit. At the very least, the use of miniatures should get your respect for the handcrafted aesthetic it provides. And you know what? If you can't appreciate that, I got nothing for you. As for the soundtrack, I said almost all I had to say in the spoiler-free review, almost. There is one track I can't stand. I'm talking about It Can't Rain All the Time, the title track. In 30 years, it's never gotten easier to sit through. Was no one else available? The whole film, they flexed this powerhouse soundtrack only to end it with the song For Mommy by Tim and Eric. It is indefensible. I guess I'll move on to the cast, but honestly, I've said all I have to say about Rochelle Davis and Ernie Hudson in the spoiler-free review. Both of them did a good job. However, I did want to briefly chat a bit more about Top Dollar. I've been a fan of Michael Wincott ever since I first saw him as Guy Gisborne in the Costner Robin Hood. He's got such a great gravelly voice, and I go as far as to say that his track record for playing villains is on the level of my all-time favorite, Gary Oldman. But what I love about his performance in The Crow is his ability to find humor in all of the madness. One of the funniest moments of the film is when Skank is trying to tell Top Dollar about what happened to T-Bird. He's like freaking out. Wincott's subtle smirk and offhand commentary is hysterical because he says what the audience is probably thinking. By the end of the film, I found myself wanting to know more about his character, but I'm happy they didn't go too deep into the lore. Sometimes that ruins a good thing. Which brings me to Skank, played by Angel David. I'm not very familiar with this actor, but his performance in The Crow is great. He's like the lowest IQ member of T-Bird's crew, which is why I think Draven kills him last. He's not really afraid he's gonna get away. Skank has this wild brain rot energy that culminates in his manic third act. He's just so childish and all over the place, you can't help but laugh at his ranting and raving. He's also a total follower who's clearly never been invited to the big boy table. So when he finally arrives at Top Dollar's side, his response is, I feel like a little worm on a big fucking hook, which always cracks me up. While we're on the topic of T-Bird's crew, I got to address the fire it up, get pumped routine that they all do because it's hilarious. I'm not sure if it was intended to be funny, but come on, that's ridiculous. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy it's there. I say it all the time, but could you imagine if Liotta, De Niro, and Pesci all started chanting fire it up in Goodfellas? Come on. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I think David Patrick Kelly's portrayal as T-Bird is terrific, and in my opinion, he has the most memorable death in the entire film. It's not because of how he dies, but it's due to his final realizations. It's almost like he didn't truly believe in an afterlife until he encountered Draven, and Draven's existence proves two things. God is just, and he's most definitely going to send T-Bird straight to hell. I found Kelly's performance in T-Bird's pitiful final moments to be haunting and amongst the best in the film. Michael Massey also delivers a solid performance as Funboy, but in truth, there's not much of a character there outside of the morphine habit. While I'm talking about Funboy, I want to say that I like how they didn't glamorize the drug use before Draven steps in, because it would have broken the scene and the scenes that followed if they would have made it this psychedelic thing, which tends to be the generic move. But The Crow is far from generic. Then there's Tintin, played by Lawrence Mason, who, if you're unfamiliar with his later work, is a terrific actor. He's not in that much of the film, but he's our window into the seedy underbelly of Detroit by way of Gideon's pawn shop. Now, I don't know what Tintin did before he turned to a life of crime, but he must have gone to a better school than I did because I had to look up what saprophyte motherfucker meant. It's like a fungus that thrives on dead things, which makes a lot of sense in relation to Gideon, but saprophyte? That's on par with the dude calling the other Jeffrey Lebowski a human paraquat. Speaking of Lebowski, Gideon is played by John Polito. He was a lot of fun in The Crow and fit the role of the seedy pawn shop owner perfectly. Gideon is such a pathetic little worm of a character brought to life by a brilliant character actor. As for Granger Micah, played by Tony Todd and Bai Ling, I don't have a lot to say because they aren't on the screen all that much. Generally, Todd is a terrific actor, he's got a great voice, he's got a lot of emotional depth, but Grange doesn't really showcase that. Fine performances for what they were, but they weren't much. Finally, I'm going to take a walk on thin ice and I'm going to talk about Eric Draven, played by Brandon Lee. I think Draven is a difficult character to pull off because on one hand, he's the angel of death, but on the other, he's a tortured soul. I'm convinced more than anything else that The Crow at its core is a ghost story, and after listening to interviews with Lee that he gave during the filming of the movie, I think that's how he approached the character. It wasn't from a place of hate, but love, longing. I also think that he was an extremely thoughtful, intelligent person, and for that reason, there are moments in the film that I thought he may have been trying to convey just a little too much. See, there's this thing that can happen with actors when they start front-loading performances with ideas. They get in their heads. I'm not saying this applies to the whole of his performance because I think what he crafted was memorable and unique. But there are moments, mainly in the melodramatic scenes, where his point of view feels a little confused. Now, I know that there's this whole breed out there who think that saying anything remotely critical about Brandon Lee is not allowed because he died, but that's just fucking stupid. The man died making the film. That is terrible. But any artist who died making something will want to be remembered for what they made, not that they died making it. Judging by what I heard of him in the interviews, he strikes me as the kind of person who would have encouraged respectful critique and probably rolled his eyes at those who'd shun it. With that being said, the scene that I'm specifically talking about is when Draven encounters and kills Tintin. I don't know when in the shoot schedule this was filmed, so it could just be a matter of directions changing, but his deliveries felt all over the place. Sometimes he's playful, sometimes he's stern, sometimes he's almost on the verge of tears. But I think they should have just focused on how he felt about killing Tintin. Narrow it down to that. I mean, Tintin is, after all, technically Draven's first victim, ever. Draven in life was not a killer. It just felt a bit too forced for me because the emotions were shifting on a dime, that's all. Otherwise, I appreciate the way Brandon Lee handled the empathetic side of Draven. It gave me a sense that in life he was a good person who meant well, and I think that credit should go almost entirely to Lee, based on a question he posed about the character. If you died and came back 1 year later, would you try to reconnect with the people you left behind or stay away? I mean, this is The Crow. I'm sure most actors would be focused on the vengeance or the physicality or even the musician layer of Draven, but Lee's thoughtful approach is a large part of what makes his performance so unique and memorable. Now look, I know there's a remake coming out and everyone's shitting all over it, but I haven't seen the film, so I'm not going to do that. That's not fair. I should at least watch it before I critique it, right? It wouldn't take much for it to be better than the terrible sequels or that odd attempt at a TV show they did with The Crow in the late 90s. But man, it's got quite a mountain to climb to justify its existence if it were meant to be compared to the original. If I see the remake at some point, I may do a review, but it's not something that I'm really all that interested in. Until then. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Cinema Sanctum. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, share, and comment below because I'm curious to read your thoughts on The Crow. I'll see you next time.